United Airlines Flight 93. On September 11, 2001, Flight 93 took off from Newark International Airport at 8:42 a.m., slightly delayed. The Boeing 757 had 33 passengers, 7 crew members, and 4 hijackers on board, part of the same Al-Qaeda plot that targeted the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. The terrorists waited for about 45 minutes after takeoff, choosing a moment when the seatbelt sign was off and passengers were likely settled. At 9:28 a.m., they made their move, storming the cockpit and taking over control of the plane. The cockpit voice recorder captured disturbing moments as the terrorists killed Captain Jason Dahl and First Officer Leroy Homer. The lead hijacker, Ziad Jarrah, took the controls, and soon after, the plane changed direction, now moving towards Washington, D.C. At 9:32 a.m., Jarrah mistakenly broadcasted over the radio, "Ladies and gentlemen, here's the captain. Please sit down. Keep remaining seating. We have a bomb on board." This was meant to scare the passengers, but unknown to him, the transmission was also heard by ground control, alerting authorities to Flight 93's hijacking. Meanwhile, passengers and crews used airphones and cell phones to reach loved ones, learning about the other attack on the Twin Towers and the Pentagon. Realizing their plane, too, was a part of a coordinated attack, they knew they had little time to act. Around 9:57 a.m., several passengers, including Todd Beamer, Mark Bingham, Tom Burnett, and Jeremy Glick, decided to confront the hijackers. Todd's famous words, "Let's roll," became a united cry as they charged down the narrow aisle toward the cockpit. Despite being unarmed, they used whatever they could find, such as boiling water and beverage carts, to try to break into the cockpit. As the passengers attempted to breach the cockpit, the hijackers decided to end the mission rather than risk losing control. At 10:03 a.m., Jarrah crashed the plane into an empty field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, at the speed of over 500 miles per hour. Everyone on board died instantly, but the passengers' courageous resistance meant they had succeeded in preventing the plane from reaching its intended target in Washington, D.C. Indian Airlines Flight 814. On December 24, 1999, Indian Airlines Flight 814, traveling from Kathmandu to Delhi, was hijacked by 5 armed militants shortly after entering Indian airspace. The Airbus A300, carrying 190 people, faced a week-long tragedy as it was forced to make multiple stops, including in Amritsar, Lahore, Dubai, and ultimately Kandahar, Afghanistan. In Dubai, the hijackers released 27 passengers, including a man they had critically injured. Landing in Kandahar posed challenges as the Taliban surrounded the plane, limiting rescue efforts. With 2 Pakistani inter-service intelligence agents allegedly present, the Indian government suspected external interference. The hijackers demanded the release of 3 prominent terrorists held in India. After intense negotiations, Indian officials agreed to release these prisoners on December 31st, securing the safe return of the remaining hostages. However, the freed militants were not detained and later became linked to significant terror attacks, including the 2001 Indian Parliament attack and the 2019 Pulwama attack. The hijacking marked a crucial moment in India's counter-terrorism policies, and only 2 individuals connected to the incident were ever convicted, with 7 others, including the hijackers, still at large. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961. On November 23, 1996, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961 became the tragic location of an infamous hijacking attempt by 3 asylum seekers aiming to reach Australia. 20 minutes after takeoff, the men stormed the cockpit, brandishing a fire extinguisher and claiming they had a bomb, which turned out to be a bottle of liquor wrapped in cloth. Captain Lul Abate warned them repeatedly that the plane lacked fuel for such a long journey, but the hijackers, reflecting an in-flight magazine, insisted that the Boeing 767 could fly for 11 hours. They forced Lul to head east over the Indian Ocean instead of following the African coast. As fuel ran out near the Comoros Islands, Lul prepared passengers for an emergency water landing, but a last-minute struggle with the lead hijacker disrupted his view, causing him to ditch the plane parallel to the waves instead of against them. This angled impact, with the left wing hitting first, led the aircraft to break apart as it hit a coral reef just 500 yards from the shore. Many passengers, having prematurely inflated their life vests, became trapped as the plane sank rapidly. Despite the panic, local residents, tourists, and doctors on vacation quickly organized a rescue effort. 50 people survived, with Captain Abate among them, but 125 lives were lost in what became the first recorded ditching of a wide-body aircraft. Air China Flight 905. Air China Flight 905 was hijacked on October 28, 1998, during a flight from Beijing to Yangon via Kunming. The aircraft, a Boeing 737-3J6, was commandeered by Captain Yuan Bin, who threatened the crew and passengers to divert the plane to Taiwan's Chiang Kai-shek Airport. This incident became particularly famous for being one of the rare instances of a pilot hijacking his own aircraft. The pilot was unhappy about not being given housing and decided to take the plane as a way to protest his situation. His wife initially disagreed but later joined him in the plan. The hijacking happened approximately 40 minutes into the flight when Yuan informed the co-pilot of his intentions, claiming they would fly to Taiwan instead. Initially thought to be a joke, the situation worsened as Yuan took control and forced the co-pilot to comply. He threatened to destroy the plane if his demands were not met. Following protocol, the co-pilot reported the hijacking to air traffic control, which further escalated the situation by notifying the Chinese civil aviation authorities and Taiwan's air traffic control. As a response, the Republic of China Air Force scrambled fighter jets to intercept and escort the hijacked plane. After a tense situation, the flight landed safely in Taipei, where Yuan and his wife were detained by authorities. Remarkably, all 104 individuals on board were unharmed and the hijackers were charged with hijacking, but received relatively light sentences of 7 years due to the perceived lack of harm. In 2001, they were deported back to mainland China along with other hijackers. Turkish Airlines Flight 1476. On October 3, 2006, Turkish Airlines Flight 1476 was hijacked while flying over Greek airspace. The Boeing 737-4Y0 took off from Tirana, Albania, en route to Istanbul, Turkey, when Akinci entered the cockpit, reportedly with a package that he claimed was a bomb. Initially, there were fears of multiple hijackers, but it was confirmed that Akinci was acting alone, using deception about accomplices to intimidate the crew. His bizarre demand was to fly to Rome to speak with Pope Benedict XVI, which raised alarms as the Pope was planning to visit to Turkey shortly afterward. Upon receiving the hijacking alert, Greek and Italian fighter jets quickly scrambled to intercept the aircraft. The plane was forced to land at Brindisi Airport in Italy, where all 113 people on board, 107 passengers and 6 crew members, were unharmed. Akinci was arrested and later revealed that he sought political asylum rather than an audience with the Pope. He was arrested and faced trial, which drew significant media attention due to the unusual nature of his demands in the hijacking's context. Tianjin Airlines Flight 7554. On June 29, 2012, Tianjin Airlines Flight 7554, an Embraer E190, was hijacked shortly after takeoff from Hotan, China. 6 ethnic Uyghur men, armed with makeshift weapons hidden in crutches, initiated the hijacking about 10 minutes into the flight. They aimed to take control of the aircraft, allegedly motivated by jihadist sentiments. Chaos erupted as passengers, led by local officials and plainclothes police, fought back. Using seatbelts and food trolleys, they managed to restrain the hijackers. As the hijackers attacked passengers and attempted to breach the cockpit, the crew quickly executed the airline's anti-hijacking protocol, enabling the captain to return the aircraft to Hotan safely within 20 minutes. Tragically, 2 hijackers died from injuries sustained during the conflict, and 13 others, including passengers and crew, were injured. In the aftermath, the Xinjiang government labeled the incident as a terrorist attack, and several hijackers received severe penalties, including death sentences for 3 of them. Enhanced security measures were instituted at airports in the region, marking a significant escalation in response to aviation security threats. EgyptAir Flight 181. On March 29, 2016, Saif el-Din Mustafa hijacked EgyptAir Flight MS-181, creating a tense 6-hour hostage that caught global attention. The Airbus A320 was en route from Alexandria to Cairo when, approximately 30 minutes into the flight, Mustafa claimed to be armed with an explosive belt, prompting the pilot to divert the aircraft to Larnaca, Cyprus. Upon landing, the airport was immediately sealed off, and special anti-terror units surrounded the plane. Mustafa's demands quickly became apparent. He requested the removal of police from the area and sought political asylum in Cyprus. Adding a personal twist to the story, he threw a letter out of the aircraft asking for it to be delivered to his ex-wife, Marina Parashko, who was living in a nearby village. As the situation developed, Mustafa allowed around 40 passengers, primarily women and children, to exit the plane, which eased some immediate tension. However, he continued to hold several crew members and international passengers hostage. The authorities, initially concerned about a potential terrorist act, began to realize that Mustafa's intentions were more chaotic than coordinated. The siege finally ended when a crew member discreetly escaped the cockpit, likely helping to convince Mustafa to surrender. Just before his capture, He emerged from the aircraft with his hands raised, and the supposedly explosive belt was later identified as fake. Alitalia Flight. On June 30th, 1982, Sapala Ekanayake, a Sri Lankan national, took matters into his own hands after facing visa issues that kept him separated from his family in Italy. When Italian authorities denied him a visa renewal and suggested he reapply from Sri Lanka with a long waiting period, Ekanayake became frustrated. In a desperate bid to reunite with his family, he came up with a bold plan to hijack an Italian plane and negotiate directly with the government. On the chosen day, he boarded an Alitalia Flight Boeing 747 in New Delhi, bound for Tokyo. Once the plane reached 35,000 feet, Ekanayake presented a letter to the pilot, demanding that his wife and son be brought to Bangkok, alongside a $300,000 ransom. He claimed to have sophisticated bombs and warned of dire consequences if his demands were not met. The pilot, George Amorosa, immediately lowered altitude and rerouted to Bangkok Dong Muang International Airport. After a tense 30-hour hostage, Ekanayake's family finally arrived, and he released the hostages. Ultimately, Ekanayake returned to Sri Lanka, where he was arrested and later sentenced to 5 years in prison. Despite his criminal actions, some Sri Lankans viewed him as a folk hero for his drastic, family-focused stand. Lufthansa Flight 181. On October 17, 1977, Lufthansa Flight 181 was hijacked by members of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine and the Red Army faction. The situation escalated when the chief hijacker, Mahmoud Akashe, executed Captain Jürgen Schumann in front of terrified passengers, declaring, "Guilty or not guilty." This brutal act was intended to reinforce their demands for the release of RAF prisoners held in West Germany. After the hijacking, the terrorists issued a letter outlining their demands, which included the release of 11 prisoners. As the plane refueled in Aden, it took off again, landing at Mogadishu International Airport around 4:34 Central European Time. Initially, the Somali government refused landing rights but ultimately gave in, fearing for the hostages' safety. Upon landing, the hijackers dumped Schumann's body onto the tarmac and demanded food and medical supplies in exchange for the hostages' safety. They set a strict 1600-hour Central European Time deadline for the release of the prisoners, threatening to blow up the aircraft if their demands were unmet. However, the German government devised an agreement to buy time, assuring the hijackers that negotiations were underway, which led to an extension of the deadline at 2:30 Central European Time on October 18th. Unknown to the hijackers, German counterterrorism unit GSG-9 was preparing to storm the plane, resulting in Operation Feuerzauber, which would end the lives of all hijackers and save the hostages. Following the rescue, the RAF members Andreas Bader, Gudrun Ilsen, and Jan Karl Rasp were found dead in Stammheim prison, allegedly by suicide. Strangely enough, Hans Martin Schleyer, a kidnapped industrialist, was found murdered shortly after the crisis as well.